The streets have cleared out now, but shortly after the rally that started here ended, people quickly took to the streets, all of them with a similar message, saying this shooting didn't need to happen. He just walked over here to Pennsylvania and Washington, and there is trash burning in the street. A stark difference from what we're seeing in other parts of the country and here in Indiana, but you can imagine people are definitely following the developments. Down on the ground, you can see the glass from where a bullet shattered this door. Now, this shooting happened Sunday night on Ramadan. It was the last day of a Muslim holiday. This is a similar scenario that's played out all around downtown Indianapolis tonight. People definitely high with emotions and feelings and just letting it out some way or the other. So you're going to see some interesting spots around this house, like this small door. The story goes that they hid 14 slaves in this small space. But with concerns about crimes against immigrants growing, companies need to rethink security. It's not sleet, but it is very heavy snow. I'm kind of standing in this angle because the snow is coming in sideways, and you could actually hear it tapping on my hat, waiting, trying to get word. And with each minute that just passed by, that fear just inched down deeper and deeper. It was great talking to her, and I have to tell you, she still got it.
Yeah.
Every shot she took, she made it, and she had a suit jacket on. Local community members say what we saw at the Capitol is evidence of the unfair treatment Black and brown people have been talking about for generations.
The neighborhood around Indiana Avenue is a historically Black neighborhood. Black people started settling here generations ago, including Carlette Duffy's grandparents.
I was hoping that, at some point my granddaughter could live there in a house that was built by our family.
For safety reasons, we won't say where Duffy or her grandparents' homes are, but it's in this community. The plan was to refinance her remodeled home, take the extra money, and buy her grandparents' home.
Felt like I needed to fight it. I felt like I had to say something.
But now she's getting a glimpse at what the housing market could have been like back then. Last year, she tried getting her home appraised, but it hasn't been easy. With help from the Fair Housing Center of Central Indiana, she's filed a complaint with the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, alleging discrimination based on race.
Starting last fall, we've started to see more attention to appraisals and how discrimination may be playing a role.
Personal research put her home's value around $185,000. An initial appraisal valued it at $125,000. The second, $110,000.
Maybe I should whitewash my home and see what happens.
After leaving her race off the paperwork, removing all family pictures, African artwork, staging a guest room as a yoga studio, and having a white friend stand in for her, the third appraisal ballooned to $259,000.
And I just sat down and I just cried. Because $259, all because I wasn't there. All because I took me out of it.
Duffy says she's doing her part now to show the next generation you don't have to simply take whatever is given. You don't need a lot of skill to do these moves, but you have to be able to feel the beat, the rhythm, and capture the tradition. This is Ballet Folklorico, and these are the Ballet Folklorico Mosaicos dancers.
Hundreds of years ago, and what their music was like, because those are where our dances come from. The traditions that were there hundreds of years ago. And then we just kept doing them.
The echo of shoes and skirt twirls is part of the imagery that brings this dance to life. And keeping this alive is what the founders had in mind when the nonprofit formed in 2014. By sharing this dance to audiences around the state, they hope to show the heritage and provide cultural enrichment for the people who watch.
I'm a Mexican-American that was born and raised here in Indy, and my parents always put it in me that it's so important to keep my traditions alive because it's important to never forget where you came from.
Martha Reyes is the assistant youth instructor. She says for the adults, the pride in tradition is usually already there. For the kids, it's often honed.
It's important for the youth to understand, especially that we're born here, to understand the roots of Mexico or where they're from.
While these dances don't call for a change in fortune or harvest, it's building on something that's already there.
This is how I see it. Mexican folkloric dance is just one way of keeping the culture alive.
The sign on this gas station's door says coronavirus prevention. Do not enter if you have a fever or feel ill. It doesn't say anything about being Asian.
I never experienced anything like this before.
But David, who wants to go by just his first name, says that's why he wasn't allowed inside Friday.
When he persisted and continued to ask where I'm from and yelling at me, and then I told him that I'm of Korean descent, but was born in Louisville, Kentucky, and hadn't traveled out of the country in many, many years, he just went off.
David just so happens to be a doctor and works with some of the people most vulnerable to the coronavirus. He treats cancer patients. He stops here often, traveling in and out of Indianapolis, but won't be coming back.
He was very angry and told me to get out, was not allowed to buy anything there, not allowed to use the bathroom there, never come back, don't ever come back, in a very violent and hateful way.
When we stopped by to ask questions, we didn't get any answers, at least not from the people who work inside. Instead, they called the police.
Exactly what I was told was anyone of Chinese descent was not allowed in the store, and it was directly related to the spread of the coronavirus.
The police chief says the department was told about the situation last week, and the business has been advised that that kind of discrimination is inappropriate. It seems like this is a case of one employee who probably stepped over the line. The Morgan County prosecutor says while there are no hate crime laws on the books in Indiana, a person who committed a crime like battery, intimidation, mischief, vandalism, and it's determined to be motivated by prejudice or bias could face stiffer penalties.
Another part of me is hurt and angry.
The church remains an integral part of society. The lessons taught here are often carried into daily life. That's part of the reason Harold Brown looked to the church to help improve HIV outreach in minority communities.
One place in the black community is the institution in which black people share knowledge, information, and faith. And that is our church.
In 1981, Brown contracted HIV. Back then, the disease was new and there weren't treatment options. It was a tough time as his church pushed him out, and he watched friends waste away. For him, it's been a challenging road, but after 40 years, he's still alive.
Now, all of the life that I have had the privilege to live, over many who died.
Lack of access, knowledge, and outreach in minority communities, he says, hasn't changed much. Data from the Red Ribbon Jubilee campaign shows black youths and adults account for 54% of new HIV infections. So he's up to the challenge with support from state and county leaders and pastors to further the End the HIV Epidemic campaign.
Our churches is a wonderful means by which to help our people trust the information, trust the person giving the information.
Aaron Hobbs is senior pastor at Broadway United Methodist Church, one of several area pastors who received a so-called HIV 101 course in teaching sermons as a form of outreach.
The church contributed to the hatred and the misinformation and the stigma that people living with HIV experienced. And what we realized was that God is what makes people sacred.
Hobbs has already delivered one sermon. 3 more are in the works.
And because people living with HIV are sacred people, we care about them because God cares about them.
He and Brown say just as the church takes a stand on other societal issues, it's important to take a stand on this. Protesters converged on the home of American government. They stormed the Capitol by the dozens. Even with lawmakers hunkered down for safety and police around, many roamed freely.
This summer when we had protests around Black Lives Matter, how law enforcement treated those from the black community.
When major events like this happen, Reverend Charles Harrison with Indy's 10-Point Coalition says it's easy to find the similarities, but the differences also stand out, particularly as it relates to police action or inaction.
All of us was stunned and shocked by what we saw yesterday, but when you started watching how people were being treated, you could not help but to make the comparison.
In Indianapolis, some of the peaceful protests calling for racial justice were answered with massive police presence. A different view as the city saw protests about the mask mandate at the State House. and protests outside the governor's mansion for the stay-at-home order.
During the protests this summer, when we stood up and we protested peacefully, we had law enforcement in clothes on us, and you know, they started shooting paintballs, mace, and everything else at us, and we weren't even breaking anything. You know, they was coming in on us. Yet and still, you got law enforcement open up the doors for a different culture.
James Wilson, CEO of Circle Up Indy, participated in some of the protests this summer and watched as groups never even reached the State House steps because they were met well before then by armed law enforcement.
What they did was expose the hand of what still exists in our country, that cultural and racial division and divide.
And I have a question and a poll up right now on my Facebook and Twitter pages if you'd like to chime in. Reporting in the studio, I'm Wish TV News 8's multicultural reporter, KATIERA Winfrey.